You don't belong here. I stand at the doorway with my bag still on my back. The night wind blows in from behind me and rattles the shoe cabinet. The wooden door sways softly with a low creaking sound. The living room lights are on cold white and piercing. He's wearing a shirt with the collar loose and his eyes distant. On the glass coffee table behind the couch there are 2 wine glasses. She leans against him barefoot in dark red nail polish. Her coat and a gray scarf are scattered on the carpet. He stares at me, his voice slow and deliberate. There's no place for you here. She leans lightly on his shoulder, the corners of her lips lifting. The room smells of perfume, alcohol and smoke. I grip the strap of my bag, the muscles in my arm tighten. My knuckles look pale under the light. The soles of my shoes tap against the tile with a crisp sound. He stands up, straightens the hem of his shirt. She doesn't look at me, she lifts a hand to brush back her hair. Her movements are slow like a performance. He steps forward, hands in his pockets. I step back, the wind at the doorway grows colder. The air between us feels frozen. I don't speak, I just lower my gaze to the scarf on the floor. I gave her that scarf on her birthday after waiting 2 hours on the corner. Now it lies at someone else's feet like a piece of discarded fabric. He lets out a low laugh, soft but sharp as a nail. You really should know your place. She echoes him softly, he slips his hand around her waist. I lift my head and see the contempt in his eyes. I know that look. I've seen it countless times at work. That winter when I first joined the company, he was already the project lead. I was wearing a dark blue thrift store blazer, standing in the break room fixing that broken coffee machine. The machine always leaked and always jammed. No one wanted to touch it because no one wanted to do dirty work. He leaned against the doorframe with a cup of coffee in his hand. He looked at me like I was a clown. He patted a coworker's shoulder and said, "This is exactly what newbies should be doing." I kept my head down, tightening the screws, saying nothing. Steam curled up from his cup. He took a sip and grinned like he was announcing rank. Then he tossed the empty cup by the sink. Everyone knew he didn't have to wash it. Because someone else always would. That night I stayed alone in the office. I took the machine apart and cleaned every clogged pipe. Neon lights fractured across the glass window. The air smelled like coffee grounds and metal. My fingertips burned and blistered. I ran cold water over them and tightened the last screw anyway. The next morning he stood at the door with a cup of fresh coffee. He told the crowd around him. Some people are born to carry trays and some are born to cash the checks. His laugh echoed through the lobby. Back then I didn't know I'd one day corner him until he shook. I endured those nights. I took every job no one wanted. I perfected every document. He bragged about project progress at cocktail parties. But I was the one keeping everything alive. He stood in front of the boss claiming to lead. I stood in the back row without a name. I got used to silence. But I also memorized every glance of disdain he threw my way. I remembered his grin at the conference table. I remembered his posture in the break room. I remembered the way he said the word newbie. 3 years ago he mocked me openly in the conference room. It was the weekly meeting with the entire company. I stood under the projector presenting the progress report. He suddenly interrupted and asked if I even understood basic logic. Laughter rippled from the far end of the table. My throat tightened, but I finished anyway. When the meeting ended, he patted my shoulder at the door. Don't take it personally, some people are just meant to execute. I turned away without answering. That night I sat alone on the steps outside the building. The wind was freezing my coat too thin. But my mind had never been sharper. I started learning his tactics. I started collecting his resources. I learned where he left his blind spots. I learned who trusted him and who he stepped on. I waited and quietly laid my plans. I didn't care who noticed me anymore. I only cared about when he'd fall. I approached the people closest to him. I loosened the foundation he stood on piece by piece. I reached out from the shadows and slowly took everything he thought was his. He loved standing in the brightest light. He loved crushing other people's work beneath his shoes. But he didn't understand. I never forgot a single moment of humiliation. I remembered his laugh in the conference room. I remembered his eyes in the break room. I remembered my blistered hands fixing that coffee machine. Later I got promoted. He stayed where he was. He didn't notice that the people he relied on were slowly moving toward me. I wasn't in a rush. The prouder they are, the less they see the cracks forming. He kept laughing. He kept looking down at everyone. He didn't realize the ground beneath him was already hollow. Until that day. The project was nearing delivery. He used his same old tricks to push the blame away. But this time he crossed the line. He forged parts of the progress report. He thought no one would check. But I had already set the trap. I collected all the evidence. The documents, the recordings, the emails, the timestamps. I organized everything piece by piece. And waited. He walked into the boss's office smiling. Minutes later he walked out pale as paper. That grin had been cleanly sliced away. He stormed into my office, jabbing a finger at my desk. "You set me up." I leaned back in my chair with a printed file in my hand. His signature was on it. And it was more than enough to end him. I looked up at him and said, "I'm just giving you back what you gave me." He froze, his breath short. People were watching from the hallway. He lowered his voice, "You can't do this." I stood slowly. For the first time we were eye to eye. He panicked. He made calls. He begged. But no one answered that night. Because I had already cleared the board long before he noticed. He thought I was still behind him. But I was already steps ahead. He lost his position. He lost the project. He lost everything he bragged about. He refused to accept it. He confronted me, tried to force me to withdraw the evidence. He stood in the hallway, fists clenched. For the first time his eyes held no contempt, only fear. He backed into a corner, his voice trembling. "We can talk about this." I stepped forward and he stepped back. The light stretched his shadow crooked across the floor. His palms were slick with sweat, his face ghost white. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. I stopped in front of him. "You laughed right here too." I looked at him, my voice soft. "That time you said some people are born to carry trays. Now I'm just handing the tray back." His body shook. His lips turned pale like paper in the wind. In the end he was suspended, investigated, stripped of everything. The people who once supported him avoided him like a disease. He never stood in the spotlight again. The hallway lights dimmed. His shadow shrank in the corner like a trapped animal. I turned and walked away, my footsteps sharp and steady. The night wind blew in biting cold. This time I didn't retreat. He trembled. And I finally stood above him, cold and calm.